Well, I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And welcome to Rob and Nate Record a Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the 2019 film Richard Jewell, directed by Clint Eastwood, starring Paul Walter Hauser as Richard Jewell and Sam Rockwell as Watson Bryant. I'm sure we're going to talk about other members of the cast. I guess the other significant one to mention is Olivia Wilde playing Kathy Scruggs. Pardon me, I think anybody else that you're going to...
Well, John Hamm.
Oh, John Hamm, yeah.
John Hamm's character, I think, is a composite, but Wilde, Rockwell, and Hauser all playing actual people.
Yes, and so is Kathy Bates.
And Kathy Bates.
But yeah, I don't know that you'd say starring Kathy Bates, but I don't know.
Good role for her.
But yeah, we're gonna anybody else that you need to know about, we will discuss as we go through this movie. As I mentioned before, directed by Clint Eastwood. So this is in the series of semi-true to life movies that Clint Eastwood has been doing, including 1517 to Paris, Sully, The Mule, and now this Richard Jewell movie. I kind of like these films.
It's been a kind of a nice late in life. I mean, the man's in his 90s now, or right around 90 at least.
Born in 1930, so he's 89.
He'll be 90 on May 31st. So that's a man in his late 80s is still producing really solid content. And
he's been producing these for several years now. I like these semi-true to life movies that he's doing. I mentioned to Nate that the tone that these films take on is an understated tone.
Yeah.
But you can appreciate this understated tone that these movies tend to have. I think Sully is possibly the best of these that he's done. I think
it's
that one at
the
least
most efficient.
Well, I think it probably resonates with the most people. Is probably the better way to phrase that.
It's probably the best known, with the possible exception of the movie we're about to talk about, the best known story that he's done. We were talking earlier, and we're talking about. I view Sully as just an incredibly efficient movie. It's only like an hour and a half long, and it gets through absolutely everything it needs to get through in that time. Nothing feels short-shifted.
No,
it's just very solid. It's not going to outstay its welcome. This film is considerably longer than I thought it would be, but it didn't outstay its welcome. Maybe a tad towards the end, and we'll get to how they did much more about events leading up to the bombing than I thought it would do.
I think it was necessary, though, to add the groundwork that you needed.
But we should basically talk about what this movie is, what it's about. It is the true story of Richard Jewell, who was falsely accused of planning a bomb at the Centennial Park venue at the 1996 Summer Olympic Games held in Atlanta. I have some very distinct memories about my first knowledge of, not this film, but about what became the story of this film, which was the Olympic Park bombing. That happened on 27th of July, 1996. It happened about 1-something in the morning, like 1:20 in the morning. And I remember waking up the day of the 27th and coming down to the family room, and my dad was there, and this was on the news, and asking him about, what happened? Something bombing at the Olympics? And this was the day that my dad drove me from Boise up to Portland, Oregon, because I was going to a debate camp there for about 2 weeks at Lewis and Clark College. And so that was the day. So I got up a little earlier than usual because we were traveling about an 8 hour or so drive to Portland from Boise. And it just lodged in my memory because it had this connection to something else.
Yeah.
Fairly important in that summer, at least. And the college that I went to have the debate camp was Lewis and Clark College, which would become quasi-famous in a few more years because of its most famous alumnus, class of 1995, Monica Lewinsky.
Oh.
So I've eaten in the same cafeteria as Monica Lewinsky.
There you go. Yeah, that's an interesting way to remember it. I don't have a lot of real specific memories of this. I do remember it. I do remember the name Richard Jewell. Yeah, I don't remember a lot of specifics outside of that. Yeah, this film, the plot of the film, it follows Richard Jewell, who was a security guard who was employed to do security at the Centennial Park or the Olympic Park there in Atlanta.
And this was basically a concert venue associated with the Olympics.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know a lot about... I mean, that's how it's portrayed in the film. I don't know a lot about how it actually was. I wasn't.
Maybe medal ceremony.
We're from. I don't know if that was there or not. I'm here from Salt Lake City, but and while Salt Lake City hosted the Olympics, in the early 2000s. I was not in Salt Lake when the Olympics were here, so I have no experience with how some of those things are done. I've done no research on it. I know where many of the venues were here in Salt Lake, but I wasn't present here when the Olympics were here, so I didn't see how a lot of that was handled. I don't know. It seems like if you have that large of a stage area, you're going to do multiple things there, but I don't know. Nate mentioned that this film does more of the back history of Richard Jewell. It shows...
It has a little kind of prologue back in 1986 about how Richard Jewell met the man who would become his good friend and lawyer.
Watson Bryant.
Yeah, here played by Sam Rockwell in a really solid performance.
I really like Sam Rockwell. He's quickly becoming one of my favorite actors. He's almost always a supporting actor, but just some really solid performances between the way back. I mean, you could list a number of them, and then Three Billboards Outside of Ebbing.
Confessions of a Dangerous Mind. He was in The Green Mile.
Yeah, Sam Rockwell is he's a great actor, and it took a long time for him to really get a lot of attention and to earn awards for his performances. But Sam Rockwell is just a solid actor who just turns in great performances.
And also really solid is the gentleman, Mr. Paul Walter Hauser, who plays Richard Jewell. He is perfect for the part. He looks sufficiently like him.
Yeah.
I was thinking, this is a guy who's really good in this role, but what extent is he versatile? I mean, what else could you cast him as? And we were surprised to see that he's been in a number of fairly high-profile movies over the last few years, including I, Tonya. I believe he played the man that Tonya Harding's husband consulted with or kind of hired out to do the knee breaking. He's also in Black Klansman and a film called Late Night, which was a recent Amazon production.
Yeah, and he has 4 films currently in post-production.
Which is impressive.
And 3 more that list as being completed, but don't have scheduled release dates yet. So the film starts out, like Nate said, with a little bit of a prologue going back into Richard Jewell's history. You're introduced to the character of Watson Bryant, who Richard Jewell is, I guess, the supply clerk for an office building.
It's an office building. It's some kind of like a Georgia State Small Business Association. And Mr. Bryant is lawyer for them. And later on, they spend some time showing these two having a friendly relationship. And later on, Jewell, when Watson asked him, "Why did you come to me as your lawyer?" he said, "You were the only lawyer there at the business administration who didn't treat me like crap. They didn't make fun of me.
Who treated me like a human being."
Yeah.
But so we're introduced to them knowing each other in this exchange, and at their common workplace. Richard Jewell then leaves to go be a security guard somewhere. We learn that he's had a job as a police officer and has been terminated, and he's now a security guard. A security guard at a college.
So after the 86 prologue, we jump ahead 10 years to 96, and then they establish more of the background about what Jewell has been doing in that time, a brief stint as a police officer. At the beginning of the film, he is a campus security guard at a smallish college in the Atlanta area. He gets dismissed from that because he's a little too zealous in his position.
He's overzealous. He presumes at the direction of the dean of the college, but was mistaken, took things a little too seriously, and loses his position there, and then he's hired on in some capacity as a security guard at the Olympics and assigned to the Centennial Park or the Olympic Park. And then that kind of leads us, then there's kind of a scene where he and his mom are attending a Kenny Rogers concert
at the
park.
Kenny Rogers?
Yeah.
Actual
No. Well, so there was stock footage, but one of the credits here is Kenny Rogers impersonator by Ronnie Allen.
Ronnie Allen is a decent to good Kenny Rogers impersonator.
Yeah, but I guess they needed more shots than they had probably stock footage of. Mm-hmm. It certainly looked like some of the shots they used in that scene were stock footage that was recorded during the Olympics.
He just looked a little older, which I felt like, was this actual Kenny Rogers being made up and not filmed so well so that he'd look like a 20-year younger Kenny Rogers? But it's not.
Yeah, it's a Kenny Rogers impersonator. So anyways, Richard Jewell takes his mom to the Kenny Rogers concert, and then a few days later, he's not feeling particularly great, goes to work anyway.
Mm-hmm. Says he has the runs.
Yeah. But in his duties that evening, he tries to break up some kids that are getting drunk, just being a little disorderly, gets the expected disrespect, goes and grabs some police officers to assist him in just breaking it up. And when they do, he discovers this backpack tucked underneath a bench in a suspicious manner.
Yeah, the bench is pushed up against this tower.
It's a sound booth and TV tower.
It's about 3 stories or
venue.
so tall.
Yeah.
To film the concerts and other events.
And that's also where the soundboards were, where they were
Yeah.
controlling, everything and whatnot. It was all housed in one scaffolding tower that was covered for appearances.
Yeah.
And it's right outside of this, and he discovers this bag under the bench. The bag, it's emphasized later that the bag was tipped over under the bench. It was originally set up so that it was facing out, but it was tipped over so that it was on its back and facing upward. Richard Jewell insists on the police officers reporting it not as a backpack that was left, but as a suspicious package. Of course, the device eventually detonates, kills 2 people, wounds more than 100, and that leads us into the rest of the plot of the movie, where Richard Jewell is treated as a suspect, understandably, and to some extent necessarily treated as a suspect, but just blown out of proportion by the media and by the FBI, and especially for somebody who was innocent of the action.
So Jewell, of course, he saved lives by spotting the backpack, by being very by the book about it. And they depict in the film that some of the cops are like, there's just beer in there, man. It's like, don't make a big to-do about this. But something about it didn't strike him as quite right. And so he insisted that they go through procedure. And then the bomb guy came there. And there's that quote where he talks to one of the other cops, like, the moment you see the bomb guy turn
Go pale, run.
Yeah. And this bomb guy got pale. He said I think he said 3 pipe bombs.
3 pipe bombs, large pipe bombs in the backpack. So Richard Jewell goes about doing his duties, evacuates the tower, is assisting in pushing back a perimeter around the device when it's detonated. And again, it detonates and wounds. I think they said it wounded 112 and killed 2.
Yeah.
Had it been aiming out, it certainly would have injured and or killed many more people.
And that's something that Jewell talks about later on. It's like those punk kids, when they were messing with the backpack and turned it side over, they saved a lot of lives by accident.
So Richard Jewell is being investigated by the FBI primarily by Agent Tom Shaw, who is portrayed by John Hamm.
I'm pretty sure he's a composite character.
Yeah, probably. And then there are a couple of reporters who are covering the case, and this has resulted in a little bit of drama surrounding this. In particular, the Kathy Scruggs reporter portrayed by Olivia Wilde. There's a scene which implies that Kathy Scruggs slept with the FBI agent to get some of the information she puts into her story, and that's resulted in a little bit of controversy. That is a very small scene in the movie. I don't think it warrants the controversy it's created, as much as I've heard about it without actually knowing what it was. But having seen the film, it's not a major moment in the film. It's not a major plot point. It's a relatively small moment.
As far as we know, though, this is not accurate. That this exchange did not happen. And Miss Scruggs is dead, so she's not alive to defend herself. She died, I would guess, probably. She's depicted as smoking a lot in the film, so that may be what killed her.
Died of a drug overdose.
A drug overdose.
Specifically acute morphine toxicity.
They really make her out to be a not good person in this movie. I mean, she has a little bit of a redemption towards the end, but at first she's just really focused on breaking a big story and success. And later on, when she does some of the math, which ultimately is the thing that proves Richard Jewell couldn't have done this, because it would just have been physically impossible for a man, especially a man of the girth of Richard Jewell, to travel the distance he would need to travel to make the phone call to the police from the specific payphone that they were able to track.
She also wasn't the first person, though, to have done that research.
Yeah, that's true. It's they show
his attorneys have done it. Presumably, the FBI would have done it.
Later, the FBI mentions, that doesn't hold up, and for a while they're running off this idea that Jewell had an accomplice, even though that, to an extent, undercuts the lone wolf wannabe hero thesis that they were running off of. And again, it was totally legitimate to look at Richard Jewell. He was very logical as somebody who could have done this bombing. It just turned out he was not the man who did the bombing, that he was a legitimate hero. And you were talking to your wife a little while back about the film.
Yeah. I mentioned that we were interested in going and seeing it, and that we wanted to do an episode on the podcast about it, and about the Richard Jewell movie. And she goes, "Richard Jewell, isn't that the guy that bombed the Olympics in Georgia?"
And that's the horrible things about things like this, where if you get associated with it in the very early stages, because people don't always follow up or don't pay a lot of attention, and obviously when he's cleared, that's going to get less media attention than a recent bombing is going to.
Well, you see this in the movie Portrayal. When he is cleared, the FBI delivers him a letter saying that he's been cleared, but the FBI is not holding a press conference. They're not addressing anything that happened. There's no media circus about them returning his family's property.
He did get some kind of a settlement, if memory serves me correctly, from the Justice Department.
He would have had to have.
There's also, I don't know if you remember
if only
this.
to pay his legal fees.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember this, but there was an SNL sketch about this a number of years after the Richard Jewell
I don't recall
bombing.
this.
You may recall that they had Will Ferrell played Janet Reno, the Attorney General, and as a reoccurring bit, one of which was Janet Reno's dance party. Do you remember those?
No.
They should have made a Janet Reno's dance party movie. It would have been good, but it would have just been so wonderfully late 90s SNL that I kind of wish it existed. But
yeah.
There's a skit on an episode, again, sometime in the late 90s, where Janet Reno's doing something, and her secretary comes in and says something like, "Oh, Janet, your 1130's here." So, okay, let him in. And so a guy dressed up like Richard Jewell, or possibly even the real Richard Jewell, he might have cameoed, comes up to Janet Reno and then knees her in the groin. And she's, "Oh, same time tomorrow?" It's like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess what we were talking about was the Kathy Scruggs kind of controversy. I kind of did some quick glancing online at what this is about, and it seems like it's mostly news organizations blowing that maybe a little out of proportion, saying that their news organizations are treated unfairly in the movie. Mm-hmm. And you can see why any news organization would say that, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, every organization runs to its own defense when it has some kind of public perception issue. It's portrayed in an unflattering light. I mean, it's the way the world works. You know, they're going to... Whether it's an overreaction or not is another question.
My point was simply that I thought it was maybe a little bit blown out of proportion, but you could disagree with me.
Yeah, this movie is better than I thought it would be. When I first saw the previews for it, I'm like, oh, this is exciting. I'm glad this movie exists. And then, partially because of this controversy about Miss Scruggs, and some of the early press I heard about it was not super laudatory, and it did not that well at the box office. I think it was disappointing in its early returns.
Well, I think that's also a factor of what else is in the theaters at this time.
Yeah. But so that had lowered my expectations, but we went and saw this today. We're recording this on the 29th of December, 2019. And I'm really glad I saw it. I'm glad I saw it in the theater. It was better than I had come to think it was going to be. It's a film that's not in a hurry. It's not a typical kind of redemption tale. I mean, this is a fat, gun-loving Southern man getting a redemption movie. That doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, he's deceased, so you assume that, his mother, Bobby Jewell, and other, people like Watson Bryant would have had to have signed off on this.
And Eastwood has said in interviews that this is a story he'd wanted to put on screen for a long time.
Well, and I was actually just kind of looking at that. I found a note here that this is from IMDb, kind of some of the Did You Know About Richard Jewell. This movie, I guess, was originally set up at 20th Century Fox, but after Walt Disney Company acquired Fox's movie and television entertainment assets in 2019, they passed on the project, which is when Warner Brothers acquired the rights to the movie, and that continues Clint Eastwood's longtime relationship with Warner Brothers.
I was going to say, I believe he's done 85-90% of his film work at Warner Brothers going back, or at least his American film work, going back to probably the 60s.
Yeah, you would know more about that than I would. I know that he has an office. Anyone who watches Ellen very much knows that he has an office, kind of a bungalow on the Warner Brothers lot that's very near to where Ellen films. And it's a reoccurring gag that she likes to go and harass Clint Eastwood. There was an extended period of time where she showed Clint Eastwood's daily parking job on the Ellen Show. Apparently he's not a great parker. Doesn't park his car very well. I mean, the guy's 89. What do you expect? I guess that's kind of rude to all of you seniors. So that was not meant with any offense. It was meant lightheartedly. That was a reoccurring gag. You see various guests, she'll walk them over to Clint Eastwood's bungalow, and they'll go inside and chat with Clint Eastwood while they're there. But yeah, he's been at Warner Brothers for forever and just is a staple there. So.
And we should mention briefly, Jewell died in 2007 at the age of 44. It was a heart attack, right?
Of heart failure, yeah.
Heart failure. And he was a portly man. There's really surprisingly little I was able to find online about his personal life. I guess his mother was married at least twice, and apparently Richard Jewell was also married, but the Wikipedia page doesn't mention when, if that was before or after the events at the Olympic Park bombing. It'd be interesting to know a little bit more about him, because you don't really learn that much about him in this biopic.
Yeah. I'm kind of curious to see if this Clint Eastwood trend of doing these semi-true movies will continue. I was just trying to look at some of the numbers. This has an estimated $45 million budget. Its opening weekend was only $4.6 million, and it's showing that its current gross worldwide is only a little over $15 million.
Wow, that's really disappointing.
So it certainly has not made its money back yet, despite some early promotion, on the part of Warner Brothers.
Yeah. And we're not in the VHS days where they could recoup an awful lot through rentals and sales. I mean, that
but they're
still
going to
exists, and you still have
recruit
streaming, but I don't think it's as profitable as the VHS market was.
Actually, the streaming rights are usually pretty big. So, I mean, I assume that they'll at least make it back pretty close to their budget between streaming rights and and other types of things like that. So, for example, Netflix paid $250 million for the rights to one of the Star Wars movies.
That just seems impossible.
I mean, you're not going to pay that much.
How do you make money? If you're paying $250 million to stream one movie for X number of months.
Well, usually those contracts are for periods of years, and it's an exclusive one, so nobody else will be able to stream that, except for, like, say, the producer of the film, at this point, Disney. Yeah, but, I mean, they're not going to be paying $250 million for Richard Jewell.
Yeah.
But they're going to pay a chunk for, someone's going to pay a chunk for Richard Jewell. And so it's probably fairly certain it'll make it back at least to its production budget, if not make some money for the studio. But with lower numbers like that, I'm kind of curious to see if these late films by Clint Eastwood will continue to go.
Well, I think they will, because generally they've been pretty inexpensive, and certainly the Sully movie did really well, and The Mule did really well.
Yeah, those made a lot of money.
You can have the exceptions, the occasional film that loses money, and the trend can still be in a positive direction for these projects for Eastwood.
Yeah.
So we were talking about how critics reviewed it. Rotten Tomatoes audience score is 96%, very positive, with a tomato meter rating of 72%, which is mostly positive.
Yeah. Yeah, its rating on IMDb is 7.7 stars with 4,400 reviews. That's probably about where I would rate this. I would put this probably a 3-star film on the 4-star scale, 7 out of 10. Maybe 2.5 on the 4-star scale.
I'm liking it more than you liked it. I have been debating whether it's 3.5 or 4-star. And we just saw it, within the last hour or two. So I'm still kind of refining my thoughts on it. But I thought for what it was, it is understated. It is not a conventional narrative, which is one of the things I like the most about it, is you don't see films quite like this. This is the kind of film that would otherwise, it'd be a TV movie. But has a cast of a high caliber. A lot of effort has been put into this. They play it out. It's not a movie that's in a rush.
Yeah.
I was just really pleased with it. And this has not been a particularly good movie year. This is a highlight. It may very well make my top 10.
Yeah. Yeah, it certainly was a good film. I do like the understated tone of these Clint Eastwood films. I thought this was a good film. I just didn't think it was great. It might make my top 10 of the year. I haven't sat down and started putting that together yet. But yeah, it was certainly a good film, solid film. I really like these understated Clint Eastwood, true-esque films. Obviously, he's taking certain liberties in all of these. That's to be expected.
So that reminds me of something that I was going to mention, at least briefly. So the politics of the film. Here's a political critique of the film. So Clint Eastwood obviously is a Republican. Very Republican. He had that memorable conversation with the chair at the 2012 convention. Yeah. He's very outspoken in his politics. So somebody could read this film as a film that says the federal government, the deep state, and the media persecuting a man for no good reason. and that there is a element of Trumpist critique to the timing of the release of the film. I think that's a coincidence, but I can see how this feeds into that same narrative that many of the president's defenders have about big, mean media and government persecuting good people, which does happen occasionally. Do we want to talk very briefly about the Home Alone 2 controversy about Canada?
To me, that's a non-story. I guess you can talk about it.
It is a non-story.
It's a non-story. It's dumb. That edit happened clear back
exactly.
Yeah.
Clear back. So I guess in 2014, the CBC bought the rights to broadcast Home Alone 2 in Canada for X many years. And because they were doing it on broadcast television, they had to make some cuts to it for
editing
commercials.
it for time.
And Donald Trump's cameo is 7 seconds, and it's not important to the storyline, so they cut it out.
But if we're going to talk about Donald Trump's cameo, Donald Trump, his cameo is that as Kevin walks through the hotel towards the lobby, he asks Donald Trump for directions. I don't know if anyone has caught on to this, or very many people have caught on to this. The directions he gives Kevin are wrong.
Are they? That's funny. And Donald Trump had owned the Plaza Hotel, but I think at the point that this film was made, he no longer owned it.
No, he still owned it.
At that time in 91, 92, when they filmed that?
Yeah, and they had to pull up the carpets. There was carpet in the lobby, and they pulled up the carpet so that they could do that scene where Kevin slides across the floor to go underneath the people's legs in the lobby. And Donald Trump owned it and specifically liked it enough that they didn't put the carpet back after the film was done.
That's interesting. Yeah, and so when they got the rights in the CBC, it's Home Alone 2. You don't air it on network TV every Christmas. Yeah. So it just happened that they didn't air it again until this year. And yeah, it's a made up controversy, made up story.
And Donald Trump has created the controversy in part on his own by tweeting things like, he didn't see anyone else trying to give Kevin directions, which is what leads me to my response of, at least his directions were wrong. If I'm not mistaken, he tells Kevin to go down the hall and turn to the right, and Kevin turns to the left when he gets to the lobby. If you're going to turn it into a controversy, then at least be factually accurate. So I guess we've already talked a little bit about our ratings on this. Any other comments you'd like to?
No, I would recommend the Richard Jewell movie. I didn't
obviously
know if I would.
Yeah. Oh, I would definitely recommend seeing this. This is definitely a good film. Definitely one to see, one of the better of 2019. This is obviously pre-2001. This could not happen the way it did in the modern era. Probably anywhere in the world. Yeah. Security would be much too tight for something like that to happen. They would have had a lot more resources everywhere. I know a lot of things from educational and other pursuits that I've had in my life about things that were done here in Salt Lake City with the Olympics in terms of security, and just the way this played out never would have happened just a short 5 years later. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else to add about this movie?
No.
Well, I'm Rob.
And I'm Nate.
And this has been Rob and Nate Record a Podcast.
Gilligan's Island was communist propaganda.
And this is like a...
I don't know if it's serious or not. It's a documentary. It is true that Gilligan always wore a red shirt.
Did he?
Yeah. He always wore his red Gilligan shirt.
Yeah. Well, he wouldn't have had access to a lot of clothes.
Yeah, I didn't. That's true. But one of the reviews that I looked at when I was just doing some investigation online said, it's like, this would have been a great short, but at like an hour and a half long, it's just excessive.
I can see that.
And then they have these clips of some, like Don Wells and Russell, the guy who played the professor. They're talking about things, and it's presented as though they're talking about how it was a communist thing. But the verbiage they use is just so vague that it feels like they're talking about something else and it's cut out of context. So I'm kind of curious, but I also don't want to devote an hour and a half to the Gilligan's A Communist movie.
It'd be interesting to see a synopsis of it, at the minimum. Okay.
Do you want to introduce this one?
Sure.
And I was thinking we'd just kind of introduce what it's about, and then, depending on how long it takes, at the end we'll be like, bonus content, and then do the...
Yeah. Okay, you ready?
Yeah, are you going to introduce?
Yeah, I'm waiting for you to finish making noise, and then I'll give a 3-second pause for editing.
A 3-second pause.
Yeah.
I can mess up that pause.
Like you did the other day. I think I've got that in the recording. I need to go save it and just drop it in an episode.
Yeah.
Crap, what episode was that in? No, I included it in the outtakes. It's in one of the episodes.
Yeah.
It's in the White Christmas one.
Okay, yeah,
It's
yeah.
at the end of the White Christmas one. I included it.
Yeah, you did. No, I remember
Did you
that.
listen to that?
I did, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.